You're listening to Indications by the Conference Board.
Welcome to the Conference Board's Indications podcast. Indications is a public podcast featuring our global roster of thought leaders. Topics range from economic growth and competitiveness to human capital, governance, sustainability, and beyond. Each episode is a serious conversation grounded in data and insights that will keep you ahead of the curve in a turbulent world. I'm here with my colleague Lynn Franco, Senior Director of Economic Indicators and Surveys at the Conference Board. Welcome, Lynn. It's always great to speak with you.
Great to be back, Dana.
So let's discuss the most recent consumer confidence survey. So consumer confidence fell in November following a downwardly revised reading in October. What were the key drivers of the weaker print?
Well, what we're seeing is that we had a bit of a decline in the present situation component, in particular, how consumers are assessing current business conditions. So that seemed to have softened a bit. And also, consumers' expectations weakened a bit, both in terms of their expectations for employment and their income prospects. However, on the flip side of that, we did see a little bit of a pickup in their expectations for business conditions.
That's interesting. We know that during the month, there was still a lot of concern about COVID-19 and also inflation. And these are things we're hearing in the news. Were those two factors reflected at all in the survey?
Well, what we're seeing is that the Delta variant, which had really surged as a concern amongst consumers in the summer months and had dissipated a bit, sort of took the back seat in November. What was sort of at the top and front of consumers' minds were concerns about rising prices. And that really was one of the major drivers of the decline that we saw. However, we think that that may reverse course in the coming months, given the new COVID variant that we're seeing and the potential for that spike in COVID cases over the coming months.
Wow. So do you suppose if we if we ran the same survey today after the weekend's Omicron variant news, do you think that the responses would be different?
I think probably so. I think we would probably see COVID-19 once again emerge as the number one concern, with inflation the number two concern. And that could very likely be the scenario over the coming months, depending on how this evolves.
So you mentioned expectations dipped again. Do expectations still point to U.S. economic expansion ahead?
Yes, they do. At a current reading of 87.6, they suggest that the economy is going to continue to grow into the early months of 2022. We're just going to be facing some additional headwinds as we welcome in the new year.
Well, I noticed that buying plans also dipped in November. Tell us more about that.
Yes, we saw a softening in intentions to purchase an auto, a home, and major appliances across the board. On the flip side, though, we're seeing that it appears at least that the holiday season has gotten off to a very solid start. So perhaps instead of buying an auto or a home, consumers were busy buying gifts and other non gift items for the holidays.
So do you think that the dip in other areas reflected some challenges that consumers are facing when they go out to shop? Are there any challenges?
I think there are challenges. I mean, we're well aware of the supply chain issues. That's probably the impetus for why consumers started shopping this year much earlier than in prior years. And they may be faced, with a few items, empty shelves. And so we'll have to find substitutes for some of the items that they wish to purchase.
So do we in general think that the shopping season this year will be better than last year?
It's being forecasted to be a rather robust. I've seen projections from somewhere, 8.5 to 10.5% better. A lot of that is because of the early start that consumers got in terms of shopping. So at least I think it's going to come in at a much cheerier holiday season than it was last year.
Well, let's hope so. But let's talk about the other elephant in the room. That's inflation. Our one-year inflation expectations gauge spiked significantly in the month. What's going on?
We've actually seen pretty much of a consistent uptick for some time now, and as we know, we've seen prices rising pretty much across the board. Whether it's gas prices, food items. In our holiday survey, in fact, consumers said that they expected to pay more than they did last year for gifts and food. So it's pretty much across the board, and I think this is an issue that's going to continue to consumers are going to have to grapple with for several months.
So, given COVID-19 variants, new variants, and higher inflation, what are some factors that might help turn consumer confidence back around going forward?
I think job growth is always a key component of consumer confidence. And I think if we take sort of some of the lessons learned from what we've seen with Delta, is that while we may have a decline in confidence levels, it doesn't necessarily translate into a decline in spending. Being said, though, however, we could expect, in-person services once again to be impacted over the coming months if we do get sort of this resurgence in COVID, and then depending also on what we learn about the new variant.
Well, thank you, Lynn. Always great insights. This has been Indications from the Conference Board. If you enjoyed this podcast, you may listen to additional The Conference Board offerings by going to www.conference-board.org/podcast or find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This has been Indications from the Conference Board.